All right, we'd like to welcome in one of my great colleagues and friends, now author. He's the novelist. He's the great Dave Mishkin, lightning broadcaster for 22 years now, is it, Dave?
Oh man, you're making me
23?
do math. I guess
You,
so. We
you don't
missed a
know?
year. So here's the thing: we
All
missed
right,
the
right.
04-05 season. So in
Right.
terms of seasons, it was 23 seasons because we did some work during that
Yeah,
season where there was no hockey. But hockey years, it was
22
it was
years.
22. But I was earning a paycheck that year. Thankfully, some of my colleagues were like, "You get paid by the game. No games, no
No
pay."
pay. No pay. I know that
That was
feeling.
the Davidson group
Oh,
that was very gracious after the Lightning won the cup in
ownership
'04.
is
We missed the
everything.
whole season. So we did get paid. We got a portion of our paycheck, but that was enough. It was still pre-kids for me, JP. So
You
it
got
was a
through
little
it.
easier to make
Oh, my
ends meet.
God. Well, I want to say congratulations and well deserved as you go into the Sports Club of Tampa Bay Hall of Fame. I'm honored to be able to MC this event next week and just to be able to call you up. And just so you know, I do a little monologue.
I was there last year.
So you know, you
I
got
heard your stuff. I'm ready.
So you got something coming. I don't know what I haven't written it yet, but you got something.
You're gonna not be able to talk about me like you did Aaron Andros, though. I wasn't like putting on makeup in the dressing room at Channel 8. Like you don't have those stories to tell.
Yeah, that's great. And we appreciate that, by the way. John Cooper will be part of it. We're not
Yeah.
sure if he's going to be able to make it or not. He's got some prior engagements, I know. But Tony Dungy is going in as well. I don't want to forget anybody. Dominic Sayo. I think we got the name right. And we got Dick Vitale going in. Rob Higgins is going in. Who am I forgetting? There's
Evan Longoria.
Evan Longoria who will be there. So yeah, I always forget somebody. It's going to be a heck of a night, and we're so thankful that you're part of this class and you're going to be there. So what does it mean to you? I mean, you're far from done. You're far from Peckham. You know, you're not done with your career. So there's a Hall of Fame, lots of them waiting for you. But this might be one of the first big ones and big moments where you're professionally recognized for something that you've done, and you've been such a part of the culture here in Tampa Bay. So what does it feel like?
So I'm very honored, and you know, I know not everyone listening to your show is going to be able to hear the speech. So I'm going to share a little bit, probably what I'm going to talk about next week, because this is what I believe. I've been very lucky to find something I love to do and then find someone to pay me to do it. So, I mean, early in my career, I don't even know how many people would have been listening to. Can I say I had a career when I wasn't even being paid, when I was just doing it as an extracurricular activity in college? Babe. I mean, we might have had one or two listeners, and it didn't matter to me. I was doing something I love to do. And you know, when you're talking in front of a microphone to an unseen audience, you have no idea how big or little that audience is. But at least speaking for myself, and I probably speak for you as well, it doesn't change how you approach what you're going to say or how you approach your craft. And so I feel that I've been blessed, honestly, to be able to do something I love to do. So everything else is gravy. Like it honestly is. Now, there are the realities of life, JP. Like when I started this, I was really not making much of a salary at all, but it was just me. I was living in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, which is, you know, a small town east of Pittsburgh. The cost of living wasn't as high as it was in bigger cities. This is also going back to the early 90s. Yeah. So the dollar went a little bit farther. But, you know, as I met my wife and we had a family, like there are parts of life that need to fall into place. And it just so happened, like, I kind of got to the NHL. I had 11 years in the minors, but as I got to the NHL, like that personal side of things was also getting, I'll just use this word, a little bit more complicated, right? Yes. It wasn't just me anymore. Mm-hmm. So that part did fall into place for me, but I have felt fulfilled in terms of what I've been able to do with my career. So whether it was calling games in the minors, the majors, calling Stanley Cups, calling deep playoff runs, calling memorable moments, all of that is gravy, honestly. And this is just one more element to that. So I'm very honored. I'm thrilled to be going in with the induction class that you mentioned, some true legends there. But that's kind of how I look at it, that I kind of already won. Yeah. If you're looking at it that way, like I found a career that was fulfilling for me and been able to do it my entire professional life. So even without a Hall of Fame induction, Sports Club of Tampa Bay, my level of satisfaction in terms of, how I've built my career wouldn't change one iota.
That's awesome. So you started in Johnstown. So was it Hershey? Hershey team?
Johnstown for 3 years and then Hershey for 8.
Hershey for 8. What are minor league hockey broadcasters doing? Like, what are your remembrances of those days?
Well, the job hasn't changed and the job has changed a little bit. What hasn't changed about the job is it's not just broadcasting. That was true when I was in the minors. So really at the NHL level, I broadcast, and that's my primary responsibility. We are asked, the collective we, but also Lightning broadcasters are asked to do some other things, but it's primarily do a good job on the broadcast. That's what you're hired to do. Mm-hmm. At the minor league level, because the staffs are so much smaller, the broadcaster in many instances is wearing like 7 hats. Right. What has changed is those hats are a little different now. I mean, social media didn't exist when I was in the minors, I got the job with Lightning in 2002. So you can imagine what the previous 11 years would have been like in terms of, we had computers, right? Like I produced game notes that were, done on a computer and we printed them out. But the speed of information dissemination was just way, way slower. We had to rely on press releases. So I wrote press releases. They still exist. It's just different now.
So I think PR today's guy too.
Yeah. But I was the PR guy,
right? The PR department.
Yeah, that's basically it. And I selling advertising. I think that still happens.
Selling ads, nice.
Yeah, but nowadays, like you really have to be adept with doing video. Probably you have to, build features. The John Franzone, Gabe Marte wing of the Lightning, that probably falls into the job description for the minor league broadcaster, and being able to be nimble on social media. I'm not sure if the broadcaster has to do all of that, but I bet there's some of it. Yeah. So that part, like what is done changes, but the fact that you're not only the broadcaster hasn't changed.
Right.
And so you have to learn to manage your time and understand that for the people who are like, well, I have a broadcast coming tonight, I need to spend 12 hours preparing. Like that's just not going to happen, right? You're basically your preparation is all the other stuff that you're doing.
Right.
Like I found actually doing the game notes helped me prepare for the broadcast in some way, even though I was writing the game notes when it was a home game. And you're operating usually 3 games on 3 nights in the minor leagues. That hasn't changed. Wow. So, bus that's rides? With travel, bus rides. Absolutely. Yeah. So in the AHL, which is the league that Hershey is in and was in, which is essentially AAA. The Lightning's affiliate, Syracuse. Syracuse's first year in the AHL was my first year in the AHL. So that tells you how long Syracuse has been in the AHL. So like there are teams in the Northeast. And again, when I was in the AHL, some of these teams are no longer in the AHL, but you had Providence, you had Springfield, you had Worcester, you had Portland. Like they were all fairly close. Mm-hmm. Bus ride close. Hershey was not so much close to any other opponent. Yeah, Philadelphia came in. They were a big rival of ours when the Flyers moved out of the Spectrum. They put a minor league team in the Spectrum for a handful of years. That was an hour and a half. That was basically the closest trip we had. And then Wilkes-Barre Scranton, which is still in the league, came in. Yeah. They were about an hour and a half. Everything else is like 4 hours plus.
That's a lot.
So, you're playing on the road on a Friday. Usually that was the Hershey schedule. We might be in Rochester, playing at 7:30. Game ends. Everyone gets on the bus. You bus through the night back to Hershey for a Saturday home game. You're getting in at probably 3 a.m. And for me, like I'm rolling right into the next day, getting the game notes ready. Like everything has changed, right? All the stats have changed. Yeah. The whole league played on Friday. So that was Saturday. You're working all day. You're calling the game that night. And then usually there was a Sunday game. If it was at home, you went to bed at a reasonable hour. If it was on the road, you got back on the bus after the Saturday game and you went to wherever you were going for the Sunday game. And then you usually had some time off early in the week in terms of no games, but you still went into the office, right?
Right.
So it is a grind. And honestly, I kind of love the grind. And I think that's the attitude that is necessary, because if you don't really like doing the other stuff, if you're not really all in, it really becomes work, and it's hard to maintain that for, in my case, 11 years. But I didn't ever really felt like it was work. I felt it was.
Do you
fun,
remember the
right?
call? Like, there's, I always love the call ups for baseball. You know, when they, because we see them on social media now all the time. Do you remember the call? They get come to the bigs.
Yeah.
Like?
So for the minor league guys who were like knocking at the door, maybe you hear, oh, somebody got hurt or whatever, you know, like, oh, maybe it's me. My situation was a little bit different because neither one was completely out of the blue. I knew I was in the running for both. I'm talking about Johnstown to Hershey,
right.
Hershey to Tampa Bay, because I had an interview in the Hershey case. Hershey was the affiliate of Johnstown my third and final year there, because just like the Lightning are affiliated with Syracuse, you know, Syracuse has an affiliation agreement with Orlando in the ECHL. So Hershey's affiliation agreement my third year in Johnstown was with Johnstown. So I got to know the GM. I got to know Jay Feaster, who was
Oh, that's right.
I mean, he was actually the GM, and then Doug Yinks was the assistant GM, and then Jay ended up getting promoted, and Doug became the GM. But at the time, you know, Jay Feaster was the GM. I had met both of them because, you know, they had come to watch Johnstown play, and they had an opening, and I knew they had an opening, and they interviewed me. So I knew that I was on the short list, and it seemed likely that I would get the offer, and I did. So I was very, very happy about that. Fast forward 8 years, Jay Feaster is now the GM with the Lightning. And so when John Allers, who was my predecessor with the Lightning on radio, he was up for the Anaheim TV job. He got that job. He's still in Anaheim doing TV. But while this was kind of coming together potentially for John, Jay Feaster called me and said, get your stuff together. John Allers may be getting the TV job in Anaheim. So I didn't send it to the director of broadcasting, who at the time was Jason Dixon, who I know you know well from his time here. It went to Jay. So basically, Jay is going into Jason Dixon's like, I think you should give this guy a listen. So yeah, I mean, I knew that I had a pretty good shot at it. But yeah, and then they flew me in for an interview, and they, like, you kind of can see which way the wind is blowing, but it doesn't make it any less thrilling. And for the people who were like, whoa, it's all inside baseball. It's like, let me tell you, there were a lot of jobs that I applied for where I had no shot because I didn't have that connection.
Right. And relationships are important.
It's relationships. That's what it is. So there are a lot of demos out there that were just as good as my demo. But what Jay was able to vouch for, first of all, he hired me 8 years earlier. So that counted for something. But even if that person didn't hire you, let's say somebody's calling a Jay Feaster and being like, tell me about this guy that you hired and worked for you. It's less about the broadcast. It's more about all the other stuff that would make an employee important and valuable. Like, does this employee show up on time? Is this employee a team player? Particularly when you're talking about a sports team. Yeah. Is it, you know, me, you know, no high-end team? Like, there are things that you can't get from the demo or from a resume that are important to know. Because the last thing anyone in this position that's doing the hire wants to do is go back to the drawing board a year later. Absolutely. So that's where that kind of stuff matters a lot.
Yeah. So you get to Tampa, and obviously your style is one that cannot be duplicated. The animated way you call it, and I love the emotion of which you call the games. And I can tell that you are passionate, not only about the game, but very much so about Lightning hockey. And I love that about you. I would imagine a lot of the people that aren't Lightning fans don't. And when you're on the road, and I know there's a lot of open press boxes, and when you go nuts like that, it's usually in a very quiet building. How do you have any stories on how that has played out at all? Have you ever had the issues with other fans? Because I'm sure they could hear you down on the ice when the Lightning score.
Yeah, so now a lot of the press boxes in the newer buildings, they're not cookie cutter because some are closer to the ice, some are farther from the ice, but you do have more separation from the fans in front of you. Like, there's a drop, kind of like in Amalie. I mean, you've seen the press box in Amalie. There is a drop there. But there were some of the older buildings where you're basically right there with the fans, and certainly in the minors that was the case. Yeah. So there was, so it's kind of funny. I have a busy week next week. We have the Hall of Fame event on Wednesday, but then I've actually been invited to the Commodore, which is a comedy club in Ybor City, on Friday to do storytelling. So basically, I tell a story, hockey related, and then these improv actors like do bits based on the story.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, so it's funny because I was thinking, well, like, what are my
fun.
stories gonna? So I'm gonna do a couple from the book, which are kind of hockey related. I have one minor league story that I was like, I should do something with the Lightning. So I had this story. I'm guessing there's not going to be a huge crossover audience, although maybe there is. So if you're listening and you're going to the Commodore, don't ruin this story for the people in the audience.
Spoiler alert, right?
Yeah, spoiler alert. So the Lightning are playing the Red Wings in 2015 in the playoffs, and they are in trouble in the series. They split the first two in Tampa, and they got suffocated in Game 3 and had just could not generate anything. They're down 2-1. Game 4 is looking just like Game 3. Again, in Detroit, and this is at the old Joe Louis Arena, which is it's close quarters. Like the press box is basically just one row up from the top row in front of you. So Game 4, the Lightning are trailing 2-0, and it's fairly late in the third period. And interestingly, it was Luke Glendening. He was kind of the linchpin for this Lightning comeback because he had been in Tyler Johnson's back pocket through those two games. And that line with Johnson, Palat, and Kucherov, which was one of the best lines in the NHL that year, could not really get much going, particularly in Game 3 and then for much of Game 4. So what happened late in Game 4, Glendening gets pulled off the ice in a matching minor situation, which created a 4-on-4, but Johnson was not one of the penalized players. Johnson doesn't have Glendening on him anymore, and the Lightning go boom, boom, and score two quick goals. Johnson scored one, then he set up Palat for the tying goal. So it's 2-2 in like the blink of an eye. Like they snatched this deficit, they took the deficit and it was gone. Like I'm talking like last 4 minutes of the third period. So we get close to overtime and Glendening gets banged up. And so he's not available at the beginning of overtime, and Johnson scores in overtime. You may remember this game.
Right, yes.
So the Lightning had it was a staggering, shocking comeback and got them to 2-2. They would lose Game 5 at home. They won the last two games in that series. And, you think about what would have happened if the Lightning had lost that series. Yeah. It was John Cooper's second year. They had been swept the year before in the playoffs. And it was kind of like, I think they were expected to do more, and they did do more that playoff year. But what if the series had gone the other way? How different would history look from 2015 to now? Anyway, it didn't. So Johnson scores in overtime, and I go bananas, right? This Red Wing fan, he has a water bottle. He throws the water bottle at me. It missed, right? Thank God. So there was still liquid in there, and I'm wondering, because it was clear, if, to my benefit, it may not have been water in that water bottle. And he may have been celebrating what he was expecting to be a victory until there were 4 minutes left. So yes, sometimes my enthusiasm does not sit well with the fans of other teams. So that was an extreme example, because if I had been on the Detroit side, that would have been a gut punch of a loss.
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah.
And you're screaming, go, score! God, that's fantastic. Dave Mishkin joining us here, Lightning broadcaster, going into the Sports Club of Tampa Bay Hall of Fame on Wednesday. That style, where did that generate from? Were there other broadcasters? Yeah, the animated style that which you when you score, when the Lightning score. Where did that come from? Is it just totally organic? Was it your first call when you were in Johnstown? That's the way it went?
Well, when I started doing it as an extracurricular activity in college, I basically took two tenets into kind of how I wanted to do play-by-play on radio again. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it was born from what I liked listening to and watching when I was a kid. So I was born in New York City, but we moved to suburban Boston when I was still fairly young. My New York sports roots were not deep, even though those were the first teams that I rooted for. So really, I grew up listening to a lot of the Boston sports announcers, and even with the New York announcers, I liked listening to the team announcers because I felt like they were sharing the emotion that I had.
Yes.
And I liked not all the announcers were necessarily as enthusiastic as the others, even though they were all kind of Boston-based announcers. But I found that I liked it when the announcer for quote-unquote my team didn't call it down the middle. So when I started doing it, I'm like, okay, well, that's what I like. So
Right.
I'm going to do it this way. That was one. And the other was I made a conscious decision. This is unrelated to kind of the decibel level, but on radio, I made a conscious decision to be really, really descriptive. Now, not everyone is descriptive as I choose to be, and this is really personal preference. There's no one right way to do it. But if you listen to other announcers, I probably err more on the side of being uber descriptive than more what I'll call narrative, where like you leave the puck, right? And nothing's really happening per se. It's like D to D, and you're talking about something else. I tend to stay on the puck, okay? And so those are kind of my two building blocks. And so I don't sound the same now as I did when I started doing this in my late teens. My voice is probably a little more cultured, like you have that pip squeaky,
I
when you're
look
just
at my old
out.
tapes. Yeah. It's not
We
pretty.
do sound a little different. I think some of that is the benefit of experience.
You ever go like,
age.
I sounded like that? Why did anybody hire me? Are you kidding?
Well, I even hear some of the goal calls I had from my earlier days with the Lightning. I think I don't necessarily sound the same now as I did then. And that's just a natural progression. Yeah. But the level of the willingness to be enthusiastic has been consistent. Yeah. So even though I may not sound exactly the same for a goal call or for, I did other sports too, touchdowns, 3-pointers at the buzzer, whatever you want to look at in any sport, like a big moment. I wanted to show enthusiasm for the team that I was covering. Now, if I were doing a national game with no skin in the game, I would call it way differently. I would call it down the middle. I've done some like Tampa Bay based high school championship games. Mm-hmm. I'm calling that down the middle, and I try and be enthusiastic for both sides, but it is different when, I'm a team employee, which I am, and I'm calling games for that team. And not everybody feels quite as strongly about it as I do. And, some of my colleagues like to call it down the middle more, and that's perfectly fine. That's their choice. I make a different choice.
Yeah, I like it. I think fans love it. So when you get the big call, like I'm fairly certain that Jim Nantz scripts some stuff. I'm fairly certain some people prepare for moments like that. Do you do that? I don't think you do. Not that one's better or not. It's just personal preference, as you say. But and when you hear your big calls, like you hear the Lightning is one to Stanley, it's just so. It's such an iconic thing for us as fans, and I consider myself a fan of you. And do you think about it in the moment? What is your approach?
I never tried to think about what I might say ahead of time. I mean, look, it's not like I'm reinventing the wheel when I say the Lightning have won the Stanley Cup. So, I mean, that is a pretty normal reaction, but I try and react in the moment, because most of what I'm doing is reacting in the moment, right? Mm-hmm. I think for the 2021 Cup, I got in there, the Lightning have done it. They've gone back to back, Yeah. So, I mean, that is not like I didn't reach for grasping at straws to come up with this, but maybe what you're thinking is like the emotion behind it. Right. So it's not just the words, it's kind of the moment. Mm-hmm. And I think you do need to be in the moment. I honestly, if I tried to script something, I would probably mess it up. And, I don't think I wanted to really do that. So I try and keep my brain as clear as possible. I will tell you, because I've been asked before, like, do you have a favorite call? I'm like, you're asking me to like pick my favorite kid, which is probably unfair. I've got 2 kids and I love them equally.
Of course we do.
But I will tell you that one of the more challenging calls that was a huge, huge goal, I feel like I did as well as I could have. And that was when we were calling off the monitor during the bubble tournament. This is Lightning were playing the Islanders in Edmonton. It was what they called, actually it wasn't the semifinal, it was the Eastern Conference Final. It was the next year that we had the weird conferences. And so the Lightning and Islanders are in Game 6. It's in overtime, and Sorelli scores, and the Lightning win the series, and they're going to advance to the Stanley Cup Final. And it was really hard to tell what was going on there, because it was like a jam play at the net. Goodrow like got it to the
Oh,
net.
right.
Sorelli's jamming at it. Like nobody's sure, is it in? Is it, even Sorelli is kind
And
of
you're
like
watching it on the monitor.
and we're looking at it. It was a big monitor, but it was still like it's 2 dimensions. Like it's different than being there. And like, I'm not quite sure how I got it, but I got it. And like, I'm unsure as Sorelli's unsure. And then as Sorelli knows, I know, right? It's almost like I'm
watching him,
reading him, right?
Yeah.
It was a tricky call. Like, and these happen sometimes. I remember when Patrick Kane scored the winning goal in 2010 to win the Stanley Cup for Chicago. Like nobody knew it was in the net.
Right.
I don't know if you remember.
You don't want to be the guy
I was
calling
like,
that.
oh my gosh, what a nightmare of a goal call. And my buddy John Weideman, like he crushed it. He did a great job with it. He's the Hawks broadcaster.
Yeah.
It was tricky. This was tricky too. And I felt like the call met the moment. So that's one that I'm proud of, just based on the circumstances. It would have been different if we'd been calling the game in Amalie or on Long Island if it had not been those circumstances. But it was, and it was a huge moment because it's an overtime goal. It's a game-winning goal. It's a series clinching goal. It's getting you to the Stanley Cup final. Like, checked a lot of boxes, right?
Yeah. You don't want to blow that one for sure. And you didn't.
Kind of hard to go back and re-edit those. You know?
You can only imagine.
This goal call sounds kind of funny. What's going on here?
And I've seen some bad calls and bad moments, and it's like that. And for broadcasters, that's it. It's like that's you could have your Hank Aaron moment, or you could have your Bill Buckner moment.
It kind of goes back to what you were saying about thinking about what you're saying ahead of time. So I mean,
in the moment. Yeah.
I've tried to just react as I would every other second that I'm calling a game, where I'm reacting to what I'm seeing.
All right, so you got out of your comfort zone a little bit, or maybe not, and became an author and wrote a novel.
And
thank
you for having me on. I think we talked about this when it came out.
Absolutely, and it's interesting. I've gone into some other realms myself, but it's coming out of your comfort zone. You're so good at something, meaning you, and then you're doing something departure. But I always say, write what you know, and that's what you did. And so you can combine that, that fiction with the real world, and that's where you get really good stuff. And it's been incredibly well received. How has this whole process gone for you? And how much of it was as much for you as it is for the reader?
Super rewarding. Like the whole experience has been incredibly rewarding. And so you asked, like, how was it to go outside my comfort zone? I tried to write this in the late 2000s and didn't get very far and got frustrated and put it away. So I knew that whatever standard I was setting for the book and for myself, it didn't even come close to meeting it. So I didn't move forward with it. And it came together for me. The story did some 15 years later. And once I had the story, I knew that it was a compelling story. So like, it's one thing to go out of your comfort zone, but I wasn't completely out of my comfort zone because I knew I could write some of the hockey stuff.
Right.
And I believed that the story was a compelling one. Like when you know that, I wouldn't say the story wrote itself, but I knew I had like the bones and guts of something that would meet that standard, basically. Yeah. And so once I finished it, I was very, very happy with how it turned out. Now, like broadcasting, like anything else, this is a subjective business. So like not everyone is going to love this, and you have to go in with your eyes wide open. Not everyone loves me as a broadcaster. So maybe the fact that I've had that as my career helps in a way. So what is the most important audience to yourself? Like if you are happy with the story, that's kind of like what I was saying about the broadcasting. Like on some level I had already won. Now I could have just chosen not to put it out there, but I felt it was a story that I wanted people to read. So like it mattered a lot to me, but it has mattered a lot to me that, the people who have gotten the book, and some people get the book and sit on it for a while, which is something else. Like this isn't a 15-second YouTube video, right? Like it's an investment in time. I understand that. So reading isn't for everyone. And I am, by the way, based on some urging I've gotten from people, going to be doing an audio version of this, and I was encouraged to do it myself. So that's one of my summer projects. It may bleed into next season if I time, from a marketing standpoint, timing it wise, I may kind of launch this audio version in the fall. But some people do like listening in their car, right? They don't like picking up a book for whatever reason, but they're in their car.
Yeah.
They'll listen. So it's not just the story, it's the medium too. Yeah. Not everybody likes to read. Some people who like to read don't like sports at all, even though this really isn't a sports book. They're like, this isn't for me. You understand that.
Yeah.
But the people who have gotten it, who have read it, and some people get it and sit on it for a while, and I do that too. I don't always read a book I get right away. But those who have read it, the ones that have talked to me about it have told me how much they enjoyed it or connected with it, and that's been super rewarding too.
Yeah. All right. I'd love to keep you all day, but I can't do that. Real quick, let's talk a little bit. Let's finish up this season, kind of look to the off season. You and I were talking before this that losing to the Panthers is by no means embarrassing. They are a wagon, and they're proving it as they go through these playoffs. And I thought the Lightning had a fantastic season. And, I heard that after the disappointing loss, there was, we need to trade. I literally had somebody write in my comments, we need to trade Vasilevsky. We need to trade Coop or trade Cooch and get a new coach. Okay, that's the definition of overreaction, my friend. Like, we're okay. We still have a window here. They got an incredible core of these players, and continuity wins in any league. There's no need for wholesale changes, and I firmly believe that. That said, the Panthers kind of have our number, like we had their number for a while. And you're not like you build a team to beat one team, but I think Julian did a great job of taking a core that he had and turning it into a Stanley Cup champion. And you have to remake yourself every year, and he has to do it again. And I have great confidence that he will. But I do anticipate some changes. Where do you come down on how this whole playoff loss went to the Panthers? Obviously, some controversial plays in there. And where are we now moving forward?
So this is why the general manager's job is so difficult, because you come out of that series where the Lightning, they got outplayed. They did. Yep. They were not deserving of winning that series, no matter how you slice it. But at the time they lost the series, the Panthers had not yet dismantled Toronto, and I'll use that word, and they had not yet really done a number on Carolina, which had won 2 rounds. We have more information now than we did when the Lightning Panther series ended. But basically you have to almost split it into 4 parts. If you imagine a pie chart, okay? And then you have 4 slices of the pie. One slice is how much of this is just Florida, right? One slice is how much of it was due, at least part of this pie, to the injuries the Lightning had. They had injuries. They didn't have Oliver Bjorkstrand for the series. They had an affected Luke Glendening, who got hurt in the last week of the regular season. Game 1, Cirelli sustains a knee injury. Gord breaks his finger. Hagel gets concussed and, had to miss a game as well. So, the Lightning we saw in the series, in many ways, was not the Lightning that they wanted to have in the series.
Not even close.
How much emphasis do you put on that? Third slice, how much of this is just on us? We need to look in the mirror and say there is something systemically off that we need to adjust. And then the fourth slice is how much is this just as Julian says sometimes, the randomness of hockey. Like we didn't have a great week. We didn't get bounces, which that was part of it too. So I'm not saying that like the look in the mirror part is like 90% and the other 3 comprise 10%. It's up to Julian to determine how much emphasis he puts on all of this. And what I got from him, and this is right after the series ended, what I got from him in that press conference, he likes his team.
Yeah.
So he is putting way more emphasis on what he saw over 6 months and 82 games than what he saw over 8 days and 5 games. Mm-hmm. So I think it's the third one that I gave, which is like something systemically wrong. I think that's a very, very small slice, if it even is a slice for Julian.
Could we be more physical? Could we be bigger? Could we be?
You have to be who you are. So like, you don't want to have to spend a lot of time in your own zone, right?
No.
But if you have to spend time in your own zone, you want to be structured. So the other team isn't getting much out of that. There are a lot of different ways to go about doing that. I mean, the 2016 Pittsburgh Penguins were not a big, strong physical team. They were a speed team. They were a behemoth. Like the Lightning lost to them in 2016 in 7 games. They got that series to 7 games in large part because of Vasilevsky, who came in for Bishop, who got hurt in game 1. The Lightning really got outplayed for much of that series. Were the Penguins in 2016 like this year's Panthers? No. But they dominated that playoff year.
Yeah.
What about the LA Kings of 2012 and 2014? They are probably a little bit more like this version of the Panthers. It was like structure, physical. Yeah. Like we're not taking any chances. We're not risking anything defensively to even look for offense. I'm not quite sure the Panthers are quite that extreme, but they're probably cut from that sort of cloth. I guess my point, JP, is that it's a twofold point. First of all, there are a lot of different ways you can win. It's really about building a team to your identity and then executing. Okay. And then, the other part is you don't want to build a team specific to beat one other team.
Right.
If you feel that that's the right way to go, because as Julian said, you may not see that team. He's like, what if we don't play the Panthers? Yeah. I'm repeating that. What I will say is this, and we talked about this before we started this conversation. What the Panthers are doing right now is extraordinary.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary how well they're playing. Mm-hmm. So you might say, the division's lost for, look at all these young core players. And they do. Like, Barkov's still in his prime. Yeah. They got Seth Jones locked up. The Lundell-Luostarinen duo, like they're fantastic. Verhaeghe's locked up. Like they have their guys. Reinhart, he's locked up. I mean, they are 22, 23. Lundell's on the younger side. And it's like, what are we going to do? Well, everything is fluid. Everything is fluid.
Yeah.
There is no guarantee that the Panthers at this point next year are going to be playing as well as they are right now. To me, it's less about them being physical. That is part of how they play. I'm not saying that you're incorrect.
Right.
When they are a physical team. But sometimes you can be physical, but if you're not executing, you go for a hit and you get thrown out of position and you're giving up a chance the other way. They are giving up. What is impressive to me is how they are defending. Yeah. It's not that they are physical. They are physical as part of how they are defending. Yeah. But there are other teams that can defend just as well, like the Devils in the 90s with Brodeur defended really, really well. They weren't overly physical, other than Scott Stevens maybe. So I think it's more about finding your identity and playing to it. And what Julian liked about this year's Lightning team is they just gave up fewer scoring chances.
Yeah.
So the last thing I'll say is this. The Panthers have set a bar very, very high throughout this playoff year, with the exception of the first 2 games against Toronto. I think they've played defensively at basically a championship level through these playoffs to this point. As we speak, they're up 3-1 on Carolina. Mm-hmm. The teams that have been able to beat them in games, other than the first 2 games against Toronto, where I think they had a couple of off games. Other than that, though, we haven't seen that. So I don't think that you can expect that we are going to see that the rest of the way, particularly now that like blood is in the water, right? Like they are close. Yeah. They want this back-to-back that the Lightning got. They want it too. So how do teams beat them? How did the Lightning beat them in Game 3? How did the Maple Leafs beat them in Game 6? How did Carolina beat them in Game 4? You have to match what they are doing defensively, which is very, very hard to do. And if you can match them defensively, then it becomes more of a coin toss. And you aren't gift wrapping chances for them, which is how they are blowing out these teams, because these teams are making egregious mistakes and the Panthers are making them pay for it. When the other team is not making egregious mistakes, we're seeing these 0-0, 1-1 games that are coming down to a play here and there. And the last thing I'll say is this. What I have seen, I think Toronto benefited. Toronto deserves credit for making the plays, but I think Toronto benefited from a Panther team that was not at this level for the first 2 games. Yeah. Okay?
Yep. I agree.
I don't think Carolina or Toronto defended as well as the Lightning did against the Panthers.
I agree.
The Lightning had a bad Game 1. and they had a bad game 5 defensively. But the middle 3 games in that series, the Lightning basically did what I just talked about.
Yeah, no, they did.
They essentially matched what the Panthers did defensively. Game 2 was a 1-0 game before the empty netter.
Mm-hmm.
And game 4, I mean, the Lightning didn't see it through to the end, but they played 56 minutes plus of high-level defense, and then they had a breakdown and a bad bounce.
Yeah.
And they ended up losing that game, and they won game 3. Did Toronto string together 3 games like that defensively against Florida? I don't think so.
Maybe 2.5.
Did Carolina? Carolina had a really strong defensive game 3. It was 1-1 going into the third period. Then they gave up 1 goal, and they completely crumbled, right?
Yep.
They gave up 5 goals in half a period.
It was so unbelievable.
Right. So, I mean, that one, they had 2 good periods, and then they had a horrendous third. So, look, I mean, from that standpoint, like, the path forward for the Lightning, we learned this last summer. The path forward for the Lightning to get back to championship level is what they are doing with their defensive play, their net. How many scoring chances are they allowing? They improved drastically
they did.
in that department this year. They ran into a juggernaut.
Yeah.
There is no guarantee that this juggernaut is going to stay a juggernaut at this level next year.
History tells us that doesn't happen.
It usually doesn't. They may still be, like, they're still going to be a terrific team, and it's going to be hard to knock them off. But I don't know that we're going to see any team play at the level the Panthers have played at through this playoff year so far. And so if you're Lightning, like, this is the last thing I'll say on this, Julian, and this is a very effective cautionary tale. I'm not as close to this situation as some other people are. Jay Richards, a big Rangers fan, so he could probably speak about this more intelligently. But remember, the Rangers won the President's Trophy the year before last. They won 2 rounds. They lost to the Panthers in 6 games. They were up 2-1 in an overtime in game 4. They could have been up 3-1 in that series. They were close.
Yeah.
They were close to beating the Panthers last year. Instead, they lose. And it wasn't only that they lost that series, but think about the major changes that were made. Like, the fans' reaction a lot of times, and this is a normal reaction, is like, we lost. Something's wrong. We need to change things up. Yeah. The fan that you talked about with the recommendations. So the Rangers in some ways did that. Like,
yeah, they did.
They moved their captain, Jacob Trouba. They moved Capo Caco. They moved Hedel. You know, they moved Ryan Lindgren, who I really like as a defenseman. I think some of the players they got in were like, JT Miller is going to help their team. Like, I like JT Miller as a player, but look what happened to their team this year.
Yeah, exactly.
They missed the playoffs. Yeah. They went from the President's Trophy to missing the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how much of that was due to the fact that management kind of reacted like something's wrong here? Yeah, or just something's wrong here and we need to make changes. And sometimes making changes is not the answer. It makes things worse.
Listen to the fans, you'll be sitting with them soon enough. That's what they say. Well, Mish,
you
awesome
can say that. I am not saying that.
Listen, man, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm looking forward to bringing you to the stage for the Hall of Fame, and you're so well deserved. You're such a part of the fabric of this this great Tampa Bay community we live in. It's well deserved, and can't wait to honor you on Wednesday night. Thanks, partner.
Thanks, JP.